Welcome to Plantopia. I'm your host, David Goodori, and I'm a plant pathologist at Cornell University. Any listeners who have never met a real live plant pathologist can be forgiven. We are a very low visibility, but very high impact profession. We protect the world's food supply from disease-causing fungi, bacteria, viruses, and nematodes, all of which want to eat your lunch. This time on Plantopia.
Wheat stem rust was the biggest threat to wheat production globally. It's capable of complete crop loss, and doing that just within a few weeks of infection. You had a source in Mexico, and every year the winds would blow the spores into the US and infect the US wheat production. And it was epidemics on a huge scale. They're incredibly important diseases, and that's why we're working on them. It's like the flu virus, so it's changing all the time.
Today's episode focuses on the many parallels that exist between wheat rust and global pandemics in human populations. In both cases, we're just one step ahead of the pathogen population.
Hi, my name's Dave Hodson. I work for CIMMYT, the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center.
You're at CIMMYT. You've told us it's the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center, but where are you geographically?
So I'm talking to you from the UK. So I got stuck here with the coronavirus outbreak, but this is my original home country. I'm actually based in Mexico, just outside Mexico City, so that's CIMMYT headquarters. But for the last 7 years, I was based in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia.
And what were you doing there?
So in Ethiopia, I was running a monitoring system and setting up early warning systems for wheat rust diseases.
The average layperson might not know that wheat gets rusty. What is that?
Okay, so wheat rusts are fungal diseases that they're probably, on a global scale, the most damaging diseases that affect wheat crops. They're really important in terms of their mobility and their ability to infect vast areas of crops in a very short space of time. So these diseases have been responsible for huge epidemics throughout the world, wherever wheat is grown, really. So they're incredibly important diseases, and that's why we're working on them.
Many people go through their life without ever meeting a plant pathologist, but very few people go through their life without being affected by the work of plant pathologists. And I have one in particular in mind, named Norman Borlaug, who was once a director of CIMMYT. People may not be familiar with his name, but he won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970 for his work in wheat breeding. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I had the privilege to work alongside Dr. Borlaug for several years. I mean, he was incredibly active throughout his life, right to the end of his very long life. So you're absolutely right. I mean, his work with wheat breeding, I mean, resulted in him winning the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970. And I think to this day, he's the only person in agriculture to have ever won the Nobel Peace Prize. But really, I mean, what he started out to do was to solve the stem rust problem. So this is one of the wheat rust diseases that we're working on. So in the early 1900s, first part of the 1900s, wheat stem rust was the biggest threat to wheat production globally. And Dr. Borlaug, he went down to Mexico to try and solve this problem. So with the rust, they're wind-borne diseases. So you had a source in Mexico, and every year the winds would blow the spores into the US and infect the US wheat production. And it was epidemics on a huge scale. So that's the problem that Dr. Borlaug came to solve. And he basically did that through plant breeding, introducing resistance into the wheat varieties so that it would protect them against the disease. So really what we're doing now is it's almost come full cycle. So the work he started in Mexico in the 1950s, we're continuing that work today. And stem rust is one of the diseases that we're looking at. His work led to control of stem rust pretty much on a global scale. But in the late 1990s, we saw a new race, a new strain of this disease appear in East Africa. And we realized quite quickly that new strain had the capacity to essentially destroy or take away the resistance that breeders had put into wheat all around the world. So that was a huge concern. And that was really the start of my engagement with wheat rust and the monitoring systems, the early warning systems for these diseases.
So this was a super rust race that had arisen that could overcome all of the known sources of resistance to wheat rust?
Pretty much, yes. So this race, it ended up being named Ug99 after being discovered in Uganda in 1999. So that's where the name came from. But it really was a super race. It had this ability to essentially take out most of the resistance that was being used in wheat throughout the world. And that was a huge concern, because stem rust is seen as the most damaging of all the diseases that affect wheat. It's capable of complete crop loss, and doing that just within a few weeks of infection. So it's incredibly fast how it infects, but it's incredibly damaging. It just totally destroys wheat crops on a huge scale. So that was the big concerns around this new race that emerged.
So I imagine this was a bit of a all hands on deck problem. What were the major players in resolving the issue? Because we didn't experience a worldwide famine. And the problem was addressed. How did that happen?
Okay, so it was really a global effort that was introduced. It was spearheaded by Dr. Borlaug. So he's the one who really raised the alarm on this. He knew what stem rust could do. That was his original problem he tried to solve. So he really raised the alarm globally that this was a serious issue, and we needed to have a substantial effort to try and address it. So it was a coalition of international partners combined with national partners in affected countries. So CIMMYT was a big player in this, but many other partners as well. So there were efforts around obviously resistance breeding, trying to get new resistant varieties. There was huge effort around screening the varieties in East Africa. So we've set up international screening platforms that are operating in East Africa. So hundreds of thousands of new wheat lines that are are being tested, are screened at these locations, and that's led to the release of several hundred new resistant varieties, and those new resistant varieties are now being grown in pretty much all the highest priority countries. We also brought in a surveillance and monitoring system. So that's what I've headed up for the last 15 years. So with wheat rusts, it's like the flu virus. So it's changing all the time. So you're continually getting new strains, and that's exactly the same you see with the wheat rusts. So it's a continually changing situation. So we need to know what new races are appearing, where are they, and then also using those new races to be able to screen the germplasm, so the material from the breeders, in order to develop new resistant varieties.
It sounds even worse than influenza, because you have an entire battery of races that are involved simultaneously sometimes, and the host range is broader than just wheat. It also affects other cereal crops, does it not?
Yes, that's right. So stem rust, I mean, it can also affect barley. It can also affect oats. So many of the cereals are affected by rusts. I mean, really, rice is the outstanding example that isn't affected by rust. And that's always been an intriguing question for scientists, as to why rice doesn't get infected by rusts. So there's some interesting work being done looking into those aspects.
This could not only imperil the world's food supply, but also the world's beer supply.
Yes, that's right. And we work closely with colleagues in Minnesota, the University of Minnesota, and also the USDA Cereals Disease Lab. And there's a lot of work done there on barley, and it's linked into the brewing industry. But yes, it is a concern. So barley also gets affected.
Pretty big concern, if you ask me.
That's John. He's our producer. He's also a brewmaster, and therefore not a fan of anything that threatens the global barley supply.
I was out at the North Dakota State University Barley Field School probably back in maybe 2011, 2012. They were actually in the process of building, I don't remember if it was a biolevel safety 2 or 3 facility there, specifically for the purpose of bringing Ug99 there so that they could try to work on resistance. The facility was under construction, so I got to kind of walk through that lab, and they said, okay, here's where you kind of, come in and take off everything, and here's where your underwear gets incinerated, and all that. So, but it's all under construction, so you got to see what it was going to look like.
Yeah, I think it's up and running now, John, that facility.
Yeah, it must be by now, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's the same facility at in Minnesota. So at the USDA, or the University of Minnesota, they have a BSL-3 biosafety facility there. So they're a huge partner in this. They're doing lots of work on the Ug99 isolates and other stem rust isolates as well, under very strict quarantine conditions, I should add.
Plantopia is brought to you by the American Phytopathological Society, or APS, to honor the United Nations celebration of 2020 as the International Year of Plant Health. Healthy plants can help us solve world hunger, stabilize the world's climate, protect our forests, and add beauty to our lives. Now, back to the show. So from inception to the breakthrough, and then the application of the breakthrough to resolve the crisis over Ug99, how many years did that take?
So Ug99 was first detected in 99. In 2005, that's when Dr. Borlaug really started raising the alarm and sort of getting this global coalition together. Then really from about 2007, 2008, we were lucky enough to get substantial funding through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and also the Department for International Development here in the UK. And that really was the start of these global activities on a large scale. So it's really been, an effort going on over 15 years. But I have to say that the challenges over that time of I think they're increasing. So I mean it's this continual change of the pathogen. So we've seen big changes with Ug99. So we started with a single race. We're now looking at 14 known races that are all in the same family. Essentially, they're all related to one another. And those races have now spread across 13 countries. So Egypt all the way down to South Africa, and then all the way into Iran in the Middle East. But what we're also seeing with stem rust is the emergence of non-Ug99 races, and these are equally damaging. So we've seen epidemics in Ethiopia and other places that are the result of non-Ug99 stem rust races. So this is a huge challenge. So we're really seeing the re-emergence of stem rust almost on a global scale. So it's why we need to continue and increase the activities that we're doing.
So it would seem that there is a genesis of some of these new races in developing countries, not the major production areas of the world. How do you track the distribution of pathogenic races in this group in an area that may not have access to the technology to do that?
Okay, so what we've been able to do is put together a very large surveillance network. So we're now covering about 40 countries. So on an annual basis, we've now got standardized surveillance and sampling going on across those countries. So it's an incredible network of partners that are doing this. In order to determine the races that are involved, then you need a specialized lab to do this. So it's done in a controlled greenhouse environment, the testing. So we have a network of international labs. So we work with the USDA Cereals Disease Lab in Minnesota. We work with the Global Rust Reference Center in Aarhus University in Denmark. We've now got a new facility developed by ICARDA and Turkey in Izmir, Turkey, which is working on a regional basis. But we've also built in-country capacity. So in Ethiopia, we've now got fully functional race analysis labs that are up and running and working, and we're looking to put the same in Kenya as well. And we've got other countries where we've got this in-country capacity. So we've got this whole network of surveillance sampling, and then an increasing network of labs that can undertake the race analysis. So that's how we're tracking the evolution of the pathogen and the new races.
Is there any possibility that someday a lower cost diagnostic kit might be available for determining the race distribution?
Yeah, so we've got a really interesting project going on at the moment. It's on wheat yellow rust, so that's another one of the rust diseases, but it's also a huge problem globally. So we're working together with the John Innes Centre in the UK. So with colleagues there, we've using it's called a nanopore gene sequencer. It's just incredible. It's a gene sequencer that's about the size of your mobile phone. So this sequencer, it's very affordable. It's obviously very, very portable. So we've developed a system we call Marple. And basically it's a diagnostic lab in a suitcase. So we can use this mobile lab, and we're now able, within 2 days from collecting a field sample, to be able to determine the strain of the yellow rust pathogen. Our next step would be to take this to stem rust. So I think this is a really nice example of these new technologies, new diagnostics that are being applied in pathology. So I think this is a really exciting new project that we've got going, and we're now starting to scale this out in Ethiopia.
It sounds like there is so many parallels between trying to stay one step ahead of wheat rust and human epidemiology, where we're now dealing with a global pandemic. But we play the same sort of game of catch-up with wheat diseases, with plant diseases, as we play with diseases that affect humans.
Absolutely. I mean the kind of inspiration for the Marple project, it was seeing what people were doing for the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. So people had used this technology, they'd taken it out into the field, and they were doing the sequencing and diagnostics in country. So we looked at that example and thought, well, why can't we do this for plant diseases? And that's exactly what we've now done. So yeah, it's kind of the parallels are there. And another one, certainly at the moment, everybody's seeing, and hearing about epidemiological models that are being applied around the coronavirus. We're also working with essentially the same tools. So we're working with Cambridge University and the UK Met Office. And with that, we're using these models to develop early warning systems and forecasting systems for the wheat rust diseases. So it's exactly the same sort of tools and technologies that are being applied in human medicine are now coming into the plant pathology world.
So we have diagnostic tests. Do we have any kind of an early warning system? Because this seems to be one of the up and coming things in modern agriculture, is the more lead time we give the crop managers to react, the better able they are to resolve the problem before it gets out of hand. They have a limited number of tools with which they can address a problem, and those tools often need to be applied early in an epidemic to affect its course, much as we're seeing now with social distancing. That works when it's applied early, so the warning of the onset of an epidemic becomes remarkably important in achieving the best possible outcome.
Yes, absolutely. Early warning, early detection, and early control are really the critical things for controlling a disease outbreak. So in Ethiopia, we've now got an operational early warning system that's running in country. So we can now, using mobile phones, do surveys and get data from the field pretty much real time. We've got an advanced forecast model pipeline that's running on the UK Met Office supercomputer, and that's giving back a 7-day risk forecast for wheat rusts. So that information goes back to country. And basically, with a 7-day forecast of risk, we can give growers maybe up to 3 weeks to take action. And we're finding that's pretty much enough time, and farmers have been able to get ahead of the disease for probably the first time in many cases. And we're linking it into an extensive mobile phone service in Ethiopia. So we're reaching hundreds of thousands of farmers with accurate information in terms of forecast and early warning. And we're now just starting to transfer that system out to South Asia with a focus on Nepal and Bangladesh initially.
So, given the importance of breeding for resistance to adapt to the constantly changing spectrum of races that are available, all of that ability to affect that stops when you put the seed in the ground. Then you're stuck with those genetics for the rest of the growing season. So how does that forecasting work? How do you know in time that you can increase the seed supply, distribute it to the broad areas where it's planted, and have the right genetics, the right genetic base there to meet the threat of this changing pathogen population? That seems like a lot of variables changing simultaneously.
Yes, and I think there's really sort of two timescales in terms of control. So resistant varieties is really the ultimate form of control. That's the long-term control option. That's what you really want to have in farmers' hands. But in a short term, if resistance breaks down, then really you've got no other option but to use fungicide control. And that's where we're linking it in with the early warning system. But certainly in countries like Ethiopia, there's never enough fungicide available. So the government really has to prioritize where that limited amount of fungicide is used. And we also want to optimize it. So you use the minimum amount, but you use it in the right places at the right time. So that's the approach we're taking. So that's when you lose your resistance and you have to take like instant control and you've got to rely on fungicide, but try and do it optimally. But then for the longer term with these sort of forecasting models, we're seeing the priority areas where we need to bring in the new resistant varieties. So that's the longer term control that we want to implement.
How important are quarantines in containing the outbreak of new threats? Or do these pathogens simply produce so many spores?
Yes, you can't really quarantine any of the rusts. Yeah, I mean they're so mobile, so they're windborne over huge distances, and we can be looking at thousands to even tens of thousands of kilometers that they're capable of moving. And they can also be transferred very easily, accidentally, on people's clothing. So they walk through an infected field, they don't realize they've got some spores on their trousers, they get on a plane, and they can easily transfer new races across continents. So both those methods really make it impossible, really, to put in effective quarantine. I think you've really got, with the rust, got to rely on effective monitoring and surveillance, and then the early warning systems if you can, coupled with effective breeding programs. And you really want the breeding programs to put in, effective, long-term, durable resistance. That's what we really want to have in farmers' fields.
So when you said that this pathogen can move thousands of miles at a time, that's thousands of miles in one jump. It's not moving 10 miles today and 10 miles tomorrow. It's moving thousands of miles in the upper atmosphere.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the best example of that is wheat stem rust moving from southern Africa to Australia. And we've got pretty good evidence that that's happened at least 3 or 4 times in, say, the last 80 years. So it's a low frequency event, but it does happen. So that's about 10,000 kilometers. And that's a single movement.
And stem rust also moves from Mexico to the Canadian provinces every year.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a very well documented pathway, the rust pathway, really. That it's the wind currents, and it moves the disease as the crop matures in North America. So that's why Dr. Borlaug went to Mexico to try and control things at the source. You control things there, and then you essentially get control throughout essentially the whole of North America.
For more information about the International Year of Plant Health, visit us at plantopiapodcast.org. Thanks for listening. Our show is produced by John Bryce. Thanks also to Mark Gleason, Jim Bradeen, Laura Isles, and Roshni Karate. I'm your host, David Gadori, and you've been listening to Plantopia.